good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Um, we'll be talking about the fourth jab today. Aspen, if you could go ahead. There we go. And I hope that we benefit from the decreasing political attention this thing is receiving. When I've talked about vaccine in the past, we tended to get dogpiled by anti-vaxxers. Let me clarify what I'll be doing, and it's what I do for any kind of medical discussions. I'll tell you what I know about the evidence, and it's piling up quickly. There's very little at this point, but what we have is interesting and helpful, I think. I'll include as much detail as possible so you can make your own choices. And I'll tell you what I'll do. But here's what I won't do. I won't tell you what to do, and I won't make your choices for you. I get a lot of folks that try to get me to go into there, and that's just not the way I operate. So again, today's feature will be the fourth jab, yes or no. Previous topics, Melanie shared her weight loss experience last week. We got a lot of good feedback on that. Talked about celiac disease the week before, where there's actually a very strong molecular link of celiac disease to cardiovascular disease. And most people don't know about it. What this channel is all about is helping people understand the most common root causes of death and disability. That's heart attack and stroke. And what causes it is not that well understood by the vast majority of the medical community. And so therefore you have to learn a little bit yourself if you're going to protect yourself from chronic disease and early death. We have several courses where we make it possible for you to learn that. Insulin resistance or prediabetes, diabetes, cardiovascular inflammation, and plaque, how to measure it. And guess what? It's not the Framingham followed by a stress test followed by a cardiac cath. I have to tell you, I don't know if I've got long COVID myself or not. I got this probable COVID infection first week in December, and there were a couple of weeks when I just could not talk. I keep feeling better and better, but as you can see, I still am very hoarse. Not going to talk much about the Alabama project today or the prevention book. Just a couple of reminders for those of you who are trying to find more cost-effective ways to access pitavastatin. It's called Livalo here in the States. You can get it with Canadian online pharmacy for about $1 a day. You can get another version of it. It's called Zipitamag or Zipatamag from this pharmacy as well. So there are ways to access these medications, which for those of you who are interested in a statin and interested in a statin that does not cause increasing insulin resistance, that's the big attraction to Livalo. And Big Pharma has been making tons of money off of that advantage. So whenever there's a way to help save folks money, then that becomes popular information. Another thing that I'm providing a few reminders about is the GLP-1s. The GLP-1s and the SGLT2 drug classes. There are two drug classes that have been out for about 5-6 years now. And they are finally showing some very, very exciting information in terms of improvement of cardiovascular risk. You see, again, drugs that are being used for diabetes aren't really compared to how they manage diabetes or how they prevent diabetes. They're measured most of all by what we call CVOT, cardiovascular outcome trials. So again, if you haven't read about the GLP-1s, we covered that a couple of weeks ago in the single slide. We'll cover it a little bit more deeply in a few weeks. If you haven't read about the GLP-1s, the SGLT2s, and if you have prediabetes or diabetes, you may want to dig a little bit deeper, find out about these meds. Now, for today's feature, again, I have I have an interest. I'm a public health guy originally, so I've always had interest in vaccinations. I knew there were political movements around anti-vaxxing, but I didn't know how strong they were until this whole vaccine development for COVID started happening about a year ago. I started creating content showing people how vaccines are made, the science behind vaccines, et cetera. And on the one hand, we seemed to get a lot more interest, but then it became very clear why. There was a very active anti-vaxxer community who just started dogpiling with comments. We learned how to start saying, okay, this is an anti-vaxxer comment. It's just, never take vaccines, they'll kill you kind of thing. And it was like, okay. So we learned to skip over those comments. And then the anti-vaxxer comments they upped their game. They started their comment with something that sounded serious, and then it would devolve. So I actually got away from vaccine content. However, I've had a lot of questions from folks about this fourth jab. It's clearly the numbers are not quite as strong supporting this jab as they have been for the other ones. There are a couple of studies. One of them was just mentioned in the New York Times last night. A couple of studies out of Israel. Both of them in the New England Journal. One of them was just a couple of days ago. That's the study here that's saying, yeah, you know what? It did appear to protect, but not for very long. The other study, this study is the one we have more details on. It came out about a week ago. It was an open label, non-randomized clinical study. So basically they had folks who were healthcare workers, 1,050 of them. They enrolled to get either the Sheba COVID-19, that was called the cohort. Sheba was where they worked. 120 received the Pfizer vaccine, 120 received the Moderna vaccine. And we're going to go over a couple of details of what they saw. They were administered 4 months after the third dose in a series of the Pfizer vaccines. After the fourth dose, both messenger RNA vaccines induced immunoglobulin antibodies, IgG type antibodies, against COVID, coronavirus 2 receptor binding domain, and increased the neutralizing antibody titers. In fact, it did by quite a lot. It increased that antibody titer by 9 to 10, slightly higher than after the third dose. So that part was optimistic, but you have to remember there does appear to be a significant difference between what we see in the lab with increasing neutralizing antibody and what actually happens in the body in terms of trained killer T cells and other things. The immune system is very intricate. There are very many ways for our immune system to attack an invading virus, and it's not all about the antibody. There was no significant difference between the two vaccines in terms of this 9 to 10-fold increase in neutralizing antibody. The antibody levels in the control group did not increase. Both vaccines induced an increased neutralization of the variant and other viral strains, similar to response after the third dose. The authors found that the fourth dose did not lead to substantial adverse effects, despite triggering the systemic and local symptoms that you've seen with the first three jabs. Now, What about infection rates? Overall infection rates, and remember, this is just getting infected. It's not the serious COVID storm, ending up in the ICU, that sort of thing. The infection rates were 25% in the control group, 18.3% in the Pfizer group, and 20% in the Moderna group. So you did see it was a significant but slight decrease in infection rate. Now, vaccine efficacy against SARS-CoV-2 infection was 30% for Pfizer and 11% for Moderna. That's just the numbers that we just quoted. How much better is it? The vaccine efficacy was estimated to be higher for the prevention of symptomatic disease. And that's the way this has been from day one. Now, the efficacy was for serious disease was estimated at that point in time to be 43% for Pfizer and 31% for Moderna. Now, when you go back and you look at these lines, these are the lines that we're talking about. Now, you also have to remember that these are in people that have had 3 doses of vaccine already. The comparison group is not people that have had no vaccine. It's not people who've had 1 jab, and it's not people that have had 2 jabs. The comparison group was all people that have had 3 jabs already. So even though you're getting what appears to be a significant decrease, again, it's a relatively small amount of people. And as you can see here, these are the actual numbers and the days since receiving the vaccine. The difference was not striking, but it was clearly there. So some other limitations. This was a non-randomized study. There was a 1-week difference between enrollment. Not 100% sure all cases were caused by Omicron. You know, it's sometimes there's a challenge in terms of diagnosing it. The other thing was the numbers. It was not like we have tens of thousands of people in this cohort. The 4th jab is safe and somewhat efficacious, primarily against symptomatic disease. Results suggest that maximum efficacy is reached after the 3rd dose, and antibody levels can be restored by a 4th dose. Now, older and vulnerable populations were not assessed in that trial. So that's another, maybe one of the biggest concerns about that trial. Now, for those of you, many of you will ask, well, what is the CDC saying about this? And it's not, they're not giving as strong a recommendation as they have for the first 3 jabs. The 4th jab is recommended at the 4th month after the 3rd jab. 65 and older, they recommended it for. 50 and older, any source of immunocompromise. But what does that mean? And it really doesn't say. You know, for most of the viewers of this channel, here's the question. If I'm between 50 and 65, and I have known diabetes or even prediabetes, is that enough of an immunocompromise, what the CDC is terming immunocompromise, or a comorbidity that obesity, we know that's a comorbidity for this, and hypertension, all of which are related. At what point do you say, I've got enough risk where I really need that 4th jab? It's not just optional for me. Now, here's one thing they did say. They authorized it as safe for everybody above age 50. So again, this may sound like a little bit of, this may frustrate some people because I'm just giving you the facts. And unfortunately, a whole lot of the facts are not there. A lot of folks are going to say, well, doc, just tell me what to do. Well, I'm not going to, like I said, here's what I'll do. I'll tell you what I know about the evidence. I'll include as much detail as possible so you can make your own choices. And I will tell you what I'm going to do. But here's what I won't do. I won't tell you what to do, and I won't make choices for you. So again, this may end up being a short session today. We may not have a whole lot of of reaction and interest. Well, that's not true. We are getting a lot. So here we go. Black Tengu. So Aspen and Gilbert. Aspen, thank you so much for getting that transition in there. I forgot all about it. For those of you who are viewers, Aspen and Gilbert have to keep after me. I keep getting ahead of myself and forgetting to introduce the changes in our content and going into Q&A. But anyhow, here we are, transitioned into Q&A. Black Tengu. Third jab, now 4 to 5 months old. Protection is waning. Consequence, an uptick in hospitalizations. According to a report in Greece, 41% of those now intubated are fully vaccinated. I'll go for the fourth. That is interesting. I had not seen that. I am not, at this point in time, I'm not keeping up with as much of the COVID as I did the first year or so. And I'm very relieved to hear so many people beginning to take this as, okay, it's a public health problem. It's a personal health risk. We make our choices. We move on. Black Tengu. Are heart and vascular problems caused by accidental intravenous injection of Pfizer vaccine? Should we aspirate before injection? It's always been a standard in medicine to aspirate before you inject. You don't, there's a thing called sub-Q, which means it's under the skin, subcutaneous. There's another type of injection called IM. That stands for intramuscular. In neither one of them are you supposed to just stick it in and jab. It's a standard to stick the needle in and pull back to make sure that you haven't gotten straight into a large vessel. It's not likely with sub-Q, and it's really not even likely with intramuscular. But intramuscular is deeper, and it is more likely. Bottom line is, yes, clearly we should be aspirating. Bob Bell, how's long COVID diagnosed? Well, it's diagnosed. It's a good question, and I will just make a couple of comments. As I made a comment before, I suspect that some of my continuing hoarseness after 3 months might be a result of long COVID. But we've also got allergies going on. It's allergy season for me. I'm spending a lot of time in Alabama, which has a whole new set of allergens. Allergies in that space that geographic area are rampant. So it's hard to tell whether this is long COVID or just my usual allergies. Now, here's one thing I would say. That doesn't matter in terms of what I have. Here's what matters. The folks that have brain COVID, the folks that have respiratory long COVID, and the folks that have diabetes, prediabetes COVID. One of the things that I've seen several patients come in and they've been diagnosed with probable long COVID. And their insulin resistance just went huge increase during that time period. So I wasn't surprised at all to see the studies that have started coming out over the past couple of months indicating that those of us that have had, after having COVID diagnosis, especially folks with long COVID, seem to have gotten a significant increase in prediabetes insulin resistance. Now, back to your question, Bob, how do you diagnose it? It's an issue of symptoms. It's not a laboratory diagnosis. There's no way to say, oh, okay, so this person had COVID, we diagnosed it, now there's another test. There's not another test. You have continued symptoms, continued problems with that organ system, whether it's lung, brain, and then as you continue to have those symptoms, those problems, Um, you can look at some other things like some inflammatory testing, find some problems with inflammatory testing, but it's really more what we call a diagnosis of history and physical examination. History more than anything else. ET himself, good question. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, ET. Robert Simpson, I got my 4th jab on Monday. Joe Blow 2, here's the facts on the jab. Moderna US patent, look it up, good luck. Cognitive chaos. Well, I'm going to skip over that. And I'll tell you again, I'm going to skip over a lot of them that appear to be more emotional than content driven. Leo Acapulco, in Mexico, you can get rid of it. Pitavastatin, 2 milligrams or 4 milligrams. Exactly. If I take simvastatin, what would be the equivalent? Pitavastatin usually only comes in 1, 2, and 4 milligrams. Usually you have more of a comparison. For example, 5 of Crestor or rosuvastatin is similar to 10 of atorvastatin or Lipitor. With this one, it's not quite so obvious. If somebody's taking like a 20 of simvastatin, I would start off with a 2 of pitavastatin. Then look at the endpoints that you're looking at and adjust. Here's the other thing I'll let you know. I tend to focus on lower dose statins anyway, and I've got tons of content on why that's the case. I tend to not go with let me just add one point. I tend to not go with the higher dose statins or even medium dose statins because that really appears to be more of an issue of cardiovascular inflammation than an issue of lowering LDL. Joe Blow 2, political movement. Okay, sounds like Joe Blow's into politics here. Robert Simpson, apparently the Omicron vaccine is currently in the making. Do you think we need this vaccine? There's pros and cons to anything. I'm sure that they're going to continue to work on development of it. But here's the thing to think about with that. They also were working on a Delta, Gamma. I mean, they started working on every new variant that came out. By the time they got it ready, that variant was replaced by something else. So, yeah, it might be helpful to have a specific Omicron vaccine, but I'm very skeptical that it's going to come around early enough to have any kind of significant impact. The other thing that other comment I'll make is this. This is like the Spanish flu, which was, again, incorrectly named, but other pandemics that have gone through the human population. As it rips through the population, it rips through the population. You have very limited time to make a choice. Back in the time of Spanish flu, there was no vaccine. They had no choice. They just took the viral beating. These days, we're getting quicker at making vaccines. Here's the end of the day. A lot of people are going to be infected. A lot of people already have been infected. And as people become more resistant to the one they've been infected with, you're going to get that evolutionary pressure to get a new variant. The new variants will develop, but sooner or later, it will burn out in the population. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing Omicron. It's a whole new variant. You hear a lot of inflammatory news, and I wouldn't downplay the deaths that are occurring with it and the disease that are occurring with it. But it's not like what we were seeing in the very beginning. Not in most places. Some places it is, but I don't think we're going to get continued versions of what we had for the first year of the pandemic. Neurotraveler, my best friend died after the J&J. My ex-girlfriend was hospitalized twice after Moderna. Joe Blow, an attempt to shut down conversation, a form of censorship. brutal scout. Joe Blow, I mean, again, folks, those of you who have major anti-vax comments you want to make, you can make them, and that's fine. I'm just not going to respond to them. Neurotraveler, how do you know it from the shots? Robert Simpson, I have 4 jabs in my body already. Thank you for sharing, Robert. Cognitive chaos. Talking about conspiracy theory. Despite being vaxxed, I still got COVID. I was vaxxed too, Robert. Does anyone need a constant media stream? Okay, Vagabond Sojourner. Doc, you have addressed the question before. Why people such as myself, who were double jabbed, low carb, physically fit for my age, etc., got Omicron? Variant variability reduces jab performances. There's no question that it does, Vagabond. And I'm not sure that you're asking this point. Well, you're bringing up a couple of points. The first point is the real pandemic, the real epidemic that's going on. The folks that are really getting hammered with this, as well as the folks that are really getting hammered with heart attack, number 1 cause of death, and stroke, number 1 cause of permanent disability. There is an underlying risk factor which very few of us are aware of. By the time we reach age 60, even conservative CDC data would say 1/3 of us have insulin resistance, prediabetes. That sets us up for heart attack. It sets us up for stroke. It sets us up for COVID storm. So yes, you're right. Get physically fit, assuming you're one of those 30%, and newer data would say it's more like 2/3 of us by the time we're age 60 can't metabolize carbs healthily. If you can't metabolize them, don't eat them because they're causing cardiovascular inflammation. So yes, let's focus on the underlying risk factors. Let's get our body healthy. Now, that's one point. Your second point is variant variability reduces jab performance. Exactly. I mean, that's what we're seeing with Omicron right now. There's no question. And if you're saying, well, that means we need to have another Omicron-specific vaccine, I'm saying, yeah, that would be great. But good luck on us getting it in time for it to make a difference. Joe Blow 2. Okay, life insurance. Joe Blow's into, I think, dogpiling here. Jane Ling, can you comment on the idea that the spike protein itself, either by infection with COVID or by vaccination, causes endothelial inflammation and damage, and therefore continual boosting is a big no? I think you're bringing up a good point, Jane, and I think it's clear. This virus, whether it's spike protein from the vaccine, whether it's the spike protein that your body's making because you've gotten infected with it, it's probably, nobody knows for sure at this point, at least that I'm aware of, that it's the spike protein itself, but I think there's plenty of evidence that that's the case. So then you get to an issue in terms of trying to decide to vaccinate or not. You're saying, why would I vaccinate, stick something in my body that's causing some of this problem? You know what? That's the very first guy that started doing vaccination was a fellow named Edward Jenner. The issue that we had at that point, the thing that he focused on was smallpox. He found that milkmaids tended to be resistant to smallpox. He developed an association. He said, you know what? I wonder if that's from cowpox. You see, cows had a very similar disease, but it didn't cause as much disease. It wasn't a killer disease like smallpox. So he got the idea. He said, you know what? Maybe I can get some scrapings from this and inject it into people, and maybe it will save folks. Guess what? We don't have the first anti-vaxxers in the modern day world. The anti-vaxxer community was extremely strong in the Boston area. Was it Boston or England? Anyhow, New England or England, I can't remember. But anyhow, when he came up with this idea and started using it, there was a lot of concern. And that's the bottom line, Jang. It's your vaccination overall is a term. I mean, it's a concept, and there's a term for that concept. It's called hermeneutics. It's called a little bit of dose of the thing that's causing the problem. Wave green. If you're a 72-year-old diabetic, would you get the 4th shot? I would. And just by the way, wave green, I'm a 65-year-old. You could argue whether I'm pre-diabetic or diabetic. I'm extremely healthy. Got 1 druce in my eye. I've kept very good care of my condition, and I still plan to go ahead and get it. Now, regarding me, am I getting it because I think that I really, really need it? I think I'm right on the borderline of stronger indications. But I've got some family members that are very nervous for me, and I've got family members on the other side who don't think I should take the shot. But I've already had 3 jabs. Those folks the anti-vaxxers in my family have given up on me already. So the vaxxers are saying, you're getting ready to go back down south. Don't you think you should get that vaccine? So I'll probably do that. Now, that may sound goofy, but here's the thing. It wasn't based on that for the first 3 jabs. I thought the first 3 jabs made a very strong case. One other comment I'll make on that. I've had people say, and you've heard this and you wouldn't be surprised, I am not going to let these public health people or big pharma make a laboratory rat out of me. I've had a lot of, and I had my own patients say that. And that's okay. A lot of people feel that way. I have a slightly different perspective. And that is, if I were not likely to get exposed to that virus, then I wouldn't take the vaccine. There's no question the vaccine has side effects. It causes problems. Absolutely no question. The real question is, are the side effects and the problems from the vaccine, do they outweigh the side effects and problems from the infection times the probability that you're going to get infected? And I think all of us should consider that as 98, 99% or 100% that we're going to get infected. So it's not like some diseases where we can avoid them. I don't think we should use that as part of the calculus. Then the question just becomes, okay, there are things like heart disease, serious heart disease from the vaccine. So a lot of people have said, I'm not going to take that. It causes serious heart disease. Well, take a look at the numbers. You get far more serious heart disease from the virus itself. So at the end of the day, when we get beyond all the politics, all the emotion, all the unthinking fear, the bottom line is, which risk are you going to take? It's not a risk-benefit equation. It's a risk of taking the vaccine versus risk of the disease. So Wave Gravi, thank you. It was a good question. And again, I'll be getting the vaccine. I clearly would get it if I were known 72-year-old diabetic. So Cognitive Chaos is talking about Joe Biden. So this is not a political thing. And Joe Blow, more politics. Gator. I think you were wanting to be called Gator. And you said you weren't so much of a beer geek anymore. Regarding the SGLT2s, I was hoping you could explain the pathway that can cause them to trigger DKA. Oh, I had it happen to me. 330 fasting blood glucose at the time and went low carb. I assume the combo caused it. That is interesting, Gator. I wish I could describe exactly what went on biochemically with you, but I can't. And here's part of the question I would have. There is some ketoacidosis, and if you're low carb, you're much more likely to get ketotic, but it's the acidosis that becomes an issue, and it's the diabetic ketoacidosis. Very good questions. Sorry, Gator. I wish I could describe that. Couple of other comments from a politically oriented commenter, so I'm going to skip over them. Rick Folia, familiar with JAMA meta-study, evaluating the association. Yes, a great question. So for those of you who have not seen this study, you need to look at it, and we'll be featuring this study. We're already developing the deck on it. Evaluating the association between LDL lipoprotein cholesterol reduction and relative and absolute effects of statin treatment, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So this is a meta-analysis. This is a review of multiple other studies about LDL lowering and cardiovascular risk. And overall, I can tell you technically what I've seen is a pretty good study. I'll give you a couple of preliminaries on it. I could do a victory lap on that and say, you know what? I told you it wasn't the LDL. Well, that part is true. Here's some other questions that come up, though, and that is, well, how important are statins? So that's where a lot of folks begin to go as they read this study. A lot of folks are interpreting it to mean, well, you don't need a statin because LDL lowering doesn't help. And that's what statins do. That's not the reason when I use statins, when I recommend them, it's not the reason that I do that. I recommend them and use very low dose because of cardiovascular inflammation. And I use that when people have already shown evidence that their body has developed cardiovascular inflammation. In other words, if you have plaque, if we document plaque, I would strongly recommend that you consider a statin, not to lower your LDL, but to decrease the probability that your immune system attacks that plaque, softens it, forms a clot. That soft plaque, we call it hot plaque, gets out into your bloodstream and causes a clot, because the clot is what kills you. It's what causes a heart attack if it goes to the heart. It's what causes a stroke if it goes to the brain, and it can cause either with multiple micro clots being released. So great question, Rick. Thank you for bringing it up. And again, we'll be covering it. I'm not sure. I think it's going to be just a couple of weeks. Another one. Bottom line, a conclusive association between absolute reductions in LDL levels and individual clinical outcomes was not established. Thank you so much. Again, there's a lot of things that I say over and over and over and over on this channel. And one of them is half the people that have a heart attack have a normal LDL. So what does that tell you about the importance of LDL? It's not. So there we go with more political comments. Bob Rutledge, I'm at your Foley office. Oh, great, Bob. Thank you so much. And thanks for making me aware. We have seen what Bob's talking about is he's evidently a patient at the Alabama Project. One of the things that was very, very clear is that there is huge need for good preventive medicine in Lower Alabama, and especially around Foley. So thank you again, and I hope, let me know if how your visit goes today, Bob. So Joe Blow's saying he hates politics. I think there is some validity here. High cholesterol is called by eating carbs and sugar. Just change your diet. There's a lot of truth to just changing your diet, Joe. There's absolutely no question. we've talked about several different drug classes today. We talked about the SGLT2s. We talked about the GLP-1s. We talked about statins. The bottom line is none of them make any, they're less than 10% of the impact that you can have with just changing your lifestyle. And by far, the most important component of lifestyle is what you eat. So I could not agree more. All of us need to focus on what's important, and that is what we eat. Thank you so much, Joe, for that comment. Leo Acapulco says he's going to get the fourth. Robert Simpson, a new COVID-19 variant has cropped up in the United Kingdom. A combination of the original Omicron and its subvariant BA2 that may be more contagious than BA2. I had not heard that, Robert. Thanks for sharing. Charles DeP, Dr. Brewer, is it a reasonable approach to check one's antibodies every so often to see if you may have had the COVID virus and stand clear of the vaccine? Well, it depends on, what you're saying is, no, I'd rather take my chances with the virus, the wild type virus infection. And you can certainly make that kind of choice. You're right. Once you get the vaccine, at that point, you're going to get a positive antibody response. Once you get the virus itself, you're going to get a positive antibody. So if you're saying, look, no matter what, I've reviewed the data, like everything else, you pays your money, you takes your risks. If you're saying, and I still don't want the vaccine, I'm not sure. Yes, you can routinely check your antibodies to see if you have gotten infected. Not exactly sure what that gets for you. If you're worried about if you get sick and if it was due to the virus, then go get a nasal swab, and you can tell more clearly, is that current infection from COVID? More questions about the dangers of vaccines. Guys, I've already acknowledged. Okay, Fort Worth West Side. What are considered acceptable levels of LPA2, LPPLA2? It's lipoprotein PLA2 and MPO tests. So Fort Worth is obviously very informed about the subject of cardiovascular inflammation. And the most commonly used very few doctors are that aware of it. Some have become theoretically aware of it. Very few doctors look for it. Of the doctors that look for it, they usually look at HSCRP. That stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. That's really a non-specific inflammation marker. It's a protein made by the liver in response to any kind of inflammation. For example, we could give flu shots to 100 people today, and 66 would have a positive C-reactive protein 48 hours later. So C-reactive protein gives a lot of what we would call biological false positives, meaning something else happened biologically which caused a positive CRP test. It was the flu vaccine or a flu. Any of the viral infections will cause that as well. There are two tests that look at the immune system. I mentioned a few minutes ago that this is, the goal is to decrease cardiovascular inflammation. Cardiovascular inflammation is very simple. It sounds confusing because people don't think in those terms, but it's your immune system attacking part of your cardiovascular system. It is your immune system attacking plaque. Now, there are two types of immune cells that do that. One is called monocytes. It's also called macrocytes and a couple of other things. The other one is called polymorphs or neutrophils. Now, why get all that complicated? Because of the question and because of the test. Fort Worth is asking about two tests for inflammation. One of them is LPPLA2. That is actually the enzyme that's secreted by those macrocytes, monocytes to dissolve, to digest that plaque in the artery. And that's the process that creates risk for heart attack, stroke, dementia, and heart failure, as well as some other things. Guess what? Again, there's another group, I mentioned it a minute ago, neutrophils. And the enzyme they use is MPO. I went down that whole bunny hole, Fort Worth, and I didn't answer your question. So here's the thing. It depends very much on the lab kits. But most lab kits will go around 120 or less for LPPLA2 and 360, 400 or less for MPO. But you really have to look at the specific lab test and the specific numbers that the lab is giving you for that test. So she goes on, she goes on to say, I'm guessing it's natural and you can never get them to undetectable levels. That's correct. You always have some immune system activity going on. There's another thing too, and that is, you see this with myeloperoxidase. It's called a laboratory false positive. In fact, the most common laboratory false positives with the MPO test, and that occurs because those neutrophils that are in the bloodstream, if they age too long, for example, if the venipuncturist leaves the blood whole for half an hour or more, those neutrophils tend to pop and they release that MPO into the blood. So if they don't go ahead and spin that down and get the serum off of the blood in less than half an hour, you'll see a false positive MPO test. Another way to get a false positive is this. In many lab systems, you have a pipette. After you spin the blood down, you have a pipette go down into the sample and pull that serum out. If that pipette tip goes down into what's called the Buffy coat, or the actual spun down immune cells, it's going to be pulling immune cells as well as serum. Again, another false positive MPO test. So the most common false positive lab false positives come from MPO. The most common biological false positives come from C-reactive protein. Why am I going into that level of detail about false positives? It's because it's reality. And guess what? Don't we all just wish there was one test instead of 4? And don't we all just wish there was one test that said yes or no? Yes, we do. We all wish that. But guess what? That's not reality. Robert Simpson, can too much COVID vaccination pose a problem? Well, it brings up an interesting question. I saw a headline about a fella in Germany was recently apprehended, and it sounded like he'd gotten like 90 doses of the vaccine. And why was he doing it? He was selling the vaccine card. There's evidently that they had a vaccine passport system where he lived, and he was selling it. No more comments on that. Vagabond Sojourner, is it accurate to say people getting Omicron variant had the silver lining in that it allowed a large number of people to build natural immunity? Thank you, Vagabond. You bring up a really good point. And I started to go into that point a few minutes ago, and I went down a different bunny hole. With all of these pandemics, you tend to see the same thing. Viruses evolve to be more infectious, and that means two things. Number one, they can spread faster. Number two, they impact people less, because if I'm a virus and I infect you and kill you immediately, you don't have much chance to spread the virus. So that is the general tendency that we tend to see, that pandemic viruses, as they mutate, tend to get less and less aggressive, that cause less and less serious disease. Now, this one came out of the blocks with some very serious disease, and so that's what you're seeing. It's still decreasing in increments. Pathos, cognitive chaos. How to do so pathos and cognitive chaos and several others are saying people have been irresponsible with recommending the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. Black Tengu, how do ACE inhibitors and statins work together? It's not really clear, but what is clear is that you get, so we talked a few minutes ago about statins, and my real recommendation is not to worry so much about LDL, as we saw in this recent meta-analysis, but to worry more about cardiovascular inflammation. Well, one of the reasons that I cough personally is that I take an ACE inhibitor instead of a ARB or other blood pressure medications. And the reason I do that is because of what Black Tengu brought up. ACE inhibitors decrease cardiovascular inflammation, and they've been shown to protect the kidneys, specifically with diabetes-related diseases. Now, the other thing that's been discovered, as Black Tengu brings up, if you take both of them, it's not a 1 + 1, it's more of a 2 × 4 = 8. There's a multiplicative effect. Why? Don't know, but a good question. Okay, more arguments about how governments are using the vaccine, which I'm not going to get into, guys. Gator, if you have known high amounts of damaged LDL from former high glucose and blood work showing it, what part of lifestyle can reduce them, since a statin wouldn't help reduce the damage? Oh, you get a lot of turnover of these. I wouldn't be worried about having a permanently damaged LDL particle. I mean, an LDL is nothing but it's an ApoB, which is the name of the protein, and it's the LDL is combined with cholesterol. So, for example, let's take a look at this. If I poured, and I used to keep one of these around my desk, I poured olive oil in there, and what you would see is that the oil would form a big bubble. That's exactly what goes on with the human body. It's 98% water. Now, no matter whether you eat the standard American diet or keto or whatever, you still get fats in your diet. Well, fats are going to form globules, and those globules could cause myocardial infarction, heart attack, stroke, etc., because they could shut off. They could go to a fork in an artery tree and shut off circulation. So our body takes these what they call lipid molecules, these fat molecules, oil molecules, and separates them down into tiny microscopic particles. How does it do that? With things called proteins. That's what our body uses to get stuff done. There's a specific protein that forms several different types of cholesterol particles. That's ApoB. ApoA1 forms another type of cholesterol particle. We used to call ApoA1 forms with cholesterol to create HDL, what people used to call the good cholesterol. ApoB forms with cholesterol to form LDL, VLDL, IDL, all the other LDL particles. So what you see, Gator, is this. You can get transfer. These particles are just the protein carrying the fat or the oil. You can get transfers of these fats and oils from an ApoA1 to an ApoB in the bloodstream itself. So we're talking about seconds in terms of changes in transfer. Now, what you have then, when you're looking at your own cholesterol particles, you have an ongoing equilibrium. And so that's what we're doing when we're saying, okay, we want to change our diet, decrease the carbs for those of us who can't metabolize them. what you're doing is impacting the way your proteins that form these particles are made. So those proteins, again, even a red cell, total lifespan of a red cell averages about 90 days. I don't know what the total lifespan of a APO A1 or ApoB particle or protein is, but it's not that long. So again, we're talking not so much about, oh, I've got damaged ones out there, I'll never get them fixed. No, we're talking about an equilibrium. It was a great question, Gator. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Fort Worth West Side. Given the statin helps lower inflammation and helps prevent soft plaque from rupturing, does it affect hard plaque? And if so, what happens to the hard plaque if you don't take statins? There's been several people that say, and this question came up with K2. Well, if K2 takes the calcium out of your artery wall, then it's going to soften it and make you more likely to, more at risk for a heart attack. I have never, ever seen K2 attributed to a heart attack. And is that because people didn't know to attribute it? I think we might have figured that out when, people would say, you know what, I started loading up on K2, I discovered that, and then I had a heart attack. You don't hear that. And it just doesn't make sense. Let me go back. I think maybe I'm going down a bunny hole that might not help. Given that statins help lower inflammation and help soft plaque, does it affect hard plaque? I think when you're in it, it's again, look at the metabolism. If you're in a healthy metabolism, it's okay to reduce calcium. It's okay to get rid of a hard plaque. The vast majority of us don't actually get rid of plaque, but some people do. In fact, if you look at my own channel, by far my most popular video is where I describe my own experience. And it irritated a whole lot of people because the major change that I made was I was 57, 58. My A1C was getting up in the mid to high, 5.6, 5.7. We did a CIMT. We found plaque. I was always a distance runner, not so much high intensity intervals, not so much resistance training, but and I always stayed thin. So I expected to be doing a victory lap after my CIMT. In fact, I didn't. I found plaque. I had always hated the idea of statins. And I decided to go ahead and start taking them. And it's interesting. People say you'll hear it multiple times. One of my articles is from a comment. It was a PhD patient of a very high level, well-renowned cardiologist. And he said, my doctor, this well-known cardiologist, says you cannot reverse plaque. Plaque never reverses. That's not true. Again, I've seen it. You've seen it. It's not very common, but it can happen. And there was actually a Harvard Men's Health article about reducing plaque. They mentioned it in two places: somebody that lost 30 pounds or more, or somebody that's new to statins. I fit the second category. I didn't have 30 pounds to lose. So Don Barry, I know a large number of people in my circle of friends that have COVID and spread it amongst their extended families. However, I wear a mask often. Along with hard plaque, I use K2. Thanks for the comment. Brendan Lenane wondered what your thoughts are on inositol IP6 to lower ferritin in order to protect the heart. Lower iron levels are said to be better. That is true. And there's argument and debate about whether or not you want to get so low as to get into an anemic phase. But what we do know is that people that have problems with too much iron load in their body do have an increased risk of cardiovascular inflammation and heart attack and stroke risk. Now, inositol IP6, I haven't used it, not familiar with it. You say it also lowers A1C. Hmm. Didn't know that, but thanks for sharing. Okay, cognitive chaos. Lose weight, exercise, cut out carbs and sugar. Keep those good. Get outside and get some sun. Keep your D level high. Exactly. Um, Look at the study out of Jamaica on vitamin D. I would say this, though, cognitive. That's a very common perception that you're going to get it from sunlight. I can tell you, I am skeptical that you get enough vitamin D from sunlight. I see so many people. Um, and I do recommend just going ahead and considering supplementation. Rachel Watson, the question is this for me. I showed I have antibodies for COVID. I never had any symptoms. Don't have any now either. I still need to get the shots. Yeah, if you look at the statistics, the and the evidence, and again, nobody knows all the stories behind this, and we're just trying to piece together pieces of information. But the people that appear to be the most resistant are folks that have had both the vaccination and the infection. So you've got one of the two. Susie Fredrickson, same question as Rachel Watson. Also, anti-vax ER sounds like conspiracy talk. Why use it? Not sure what the second part, I think I covered the first part, that people that have had both the infection and the vaccine appear to be the most resistant to this, the most immune. And I'm not going to respond about conspiracy and people doing bad things with the vaccine to each other. Vagabond Sojourner, since taking 5 milligrams of Crestor daily, I've noticed my glucose has gone up significantly over 100 until the afternoon when it lowers under 100. Usually 5 daily is not going to impact your glucose metabolism. Aging does. We tend to see this. Here's the pattern that I see with hundreds of patients. They'll go along at this level of insulin resistance. In other words, doing like a standard OGTT, 75 grams of glucose challenge, 1 hour, peaking up around 170, 180. We know they've got insulin resistance, but not full-blown diabetes. Each year, about like that. And then age 48, age 58 or age 62, depending on who the person is, you'll get this bump where the glucose level the peak glucose goes way up. So it's not a gradual rise, which we would expect. It's more of you remain stable and then you get a bump. And I've had several patients, I mentioned that folks with long COVID, several patients where they were going along like this, had a diagnosis of long COVID, and then their peak glucose level went way up, way up. So the other question is, well, if you're in that case, what do? You could switch to the one statin that's known to not do that, and that is pitavastatin. That's why we covered pitavastatin in those earlier comments, and we've covered it a few times. Zipatamag was the one we talked about today. Another one is to go on a lower dose. You could go to 2.5 daily, or you could go to 5 every other day. There have been people who've had 5 once a week, and there was documented impact. I guess that's TR3 lady. Anyhow, lady, 68-year-old, fully vaxxed, boosted, had severe preeclampsia 33 years ago. Vascular disorder, and so maybe still COVID vulnerable. I haven't seen that, but it certainly makes sense. Folks that have had eclampsia, preeclampsia, tend to have more significant risk for chronic diseases later on, and inflammatory issues, cardiovascular inflammatory issues specifically. Low carb 19 years ago. For 19 years, and good on CIMT. Well, good for you. I am jealous. My CIMT is not quite so good. It's not terrible. if you look at arterial age, I had a 72-year-old artery reading when I was 57. Made some adjustments, added the low dose statin, dropped my carbs. I was not low carb prior to that. I was plant based with lots of carbs. Still lots of plants, but not so much carbs. 100 or less daily for years now. And guess what? My CIMT arterial age has gone down to 57. So major drop. So Rick Foles, changed my diet a few weeks ago. Blood pressure dropped 30 to 40 points within a week. Holy cow. Now I just need to figure out which change did it. Reduce sugar and carbs or increase fasting. My bet would be a little or a lot of both. It sounds like you did a lot of both. Live stream, almost everything medically related is controversial. Isn't that the truth? I was telling somebody that I gave up on presenting about vaccines last year when there was so much junk about it. And then I got so much question about this. I said, I'm going to put on my raincoat and jump in there. Too many people are asking about it. Taking a hardcore position of any controversy is very dangerous. I would agree. It's best to make the decision after educating yourself and not on ideology. Thank you, live stream. Very, very sober comment. I got number 4 yesterday. Thanks for sharing. Mr. Foodorama, do ARBs also protect the kidney and diabetes? Now, there are some people who would say they do. I used to take an ARB until I learned that about the ACE inhibitors. And then I switched. Well, I've got a lot of allergy stuff anyhow. I inherited it from my parents. And, I can't tell you the number of times I'm giving presentations on these things, and I'll start coughing, and somebody will say, yeah, you're taking ACE inhibitors, aren't you? Yeah. And I will tell you this, with this last episode of respiratory stuff going on for 4 months, I am strongly considering switching back to an ARB. The reason I'm sharing that story, Mr. Foodorama, I hope is clear. My point is, yes, I've studied the details of the debate. I can understand where the people that say ARBs do the same thing, why they say that. I can also understand why the other folks, myself included, would say, no, not so fast, not as good. So I went through a lot of pain for many years going from the ARBs to the ACE inhibitors. I'm about to give up and go back to the ARBs if this continues. ET himself, this time around, I can't lose weight with a low total healthy carb intake. Although I've stopped the weight gain. Any ideas? Oh, you bring up a good point, ET. And it's talking about when people do need to lose weight. And that's, we're all on our own health journey. And body fat, we used to think was an inert energy storage material. It's not. It's an endocrine tissue, and it causes insulin resistance, which causes all these other bad things. So many of us get in the mode where we've gained too much body fat, and we got to figure out how to get it off. Well, there's ways to do it. One of the most common ways is to make sure that you don't eat too many calories. What other people have found is what's called the endocrine theory of weight gain. And basically that's based on the understanding that insulin actually can drive your inability to burn fat and increase in weight. So a lot of people drop carbs. And I think that's one of the things that's really it was contentious up until 5 or 6 years ago. And the data, the science, the evidence has just become really clear. Low carb is a great way to lose weight. But eating is an addictive activity. In fact, it's the only addictive activity that you can't just go cold turkey. The only addictive activity I know of, drugs, alcohol, you can just go cold turkey and never have to touch it again. And in fact, when you do touch it, that's when you tend to fall off the wagon. With food, you can't just quit eating. So major challenges in getting beyond the next step. Now, I work with a lot of folks who are in the weight loss experience. Usually you got to change something. And, you can go low carb, you can get to your certain amount of exercise. You get in a pattern of those two things. And until and unless you make a major change in those, once you stabilize, you're there. So you got to do something. You could, and here's some things that people tend to do: intermittent fasting, prolonged fasting, fasting for 2-3 days or longer, adding high intensity intervals, adding resistance training, which most of us need to do by the time we're in our 60s anyway. Increase that muscle mass. FLECTES 12, FLECTES. Have you heard any updates on the 3 new COVID vaccines pending FDA review? I have not. ET himself, the one from Canada, did not get WHO approval due to a fishy investor. One True Moose, what's your opinion of longer chain K2 methaquinone, such as MK8, 9, 10? The statement is that it's MK4 and mostly MK7 that really have the impact. I haven't done a deep dive in terms of the science to say, well, prove it to me that 8, 9, and 10 don't really do anything. I'm aware of what's stated out there. I haven't reviewed the research. And in fact, I'm a little bit skeptical that there is a lot of evidence in that space. Thank you, One True Moose. ET himself, all dairy has K2 in small amounts. Not sure what types. Bob Bell, Zapatamag was not as effective as Livalo for lowering my triglycerides. Thank you, Bob. And you did mention that on the other one. And I meant to mention that, especially because I knew you were on. 35 on Livalo and 78 on Zapatamag. So something to be aware of. I pay the higher price for Livalo to keep my triglyceride over HDL ratio less than 0.6. That's an impressive ratio. So you bring up a couple of things. One is accessing it. I'm guessing you didn't want to try the overseas or the Canada Pharmacy online version. And you also bring up triglyceride over HDL. Triglyceride over HDL is I do recommend that people get cholesterol studies. A lot of folks don't. And then they say, if you hear somebody like Thomas Dayspring, he'll say, well, the cholesterol study doesn't really matter. It's the fractionation. I get exactly where he's coming from. You get so much more from fractionation, but you get one really important number that's more important to me than all of these others, and it's the triglyceride over HDL ratio. If you're not familiar with that ratio, look through my channel, do some searching there. It's a very, very important indicator of your cardiovascular or of your insulin resistance. There's a fellow named Chuck Smith who lost 50 pounds with Caldwell Esselstyn doing some low-fat work, plant-based work. And he said Caldwell just kept saying, no, look for this source of fat, look for that source of fat, get all those fats out. He did. He lost 50 pounds. And you would think you could do a victory lap after that. And he did. But then he had a heart attack. And he started seeing one of my videos. While he's in the hospital, started looking at one of my videos on triglyceride over HDL and looked at his. And his was 7. So he's made a lot of changes since then. And he shared this on videos that he did for the channel. And I greatly appreciate what he's done. Wildman Samurai, I'll get every COVID booster. Science FTW, not sure what that means. Cinnamon Shaw, Dr. Beth recommends inositol for A1C. Very good. Berg. I get a lot of folks that ask me about Dr. Berg. Wildman Samurai, personally think we all need yearly COVID shots. No different from the flu. Bob Rutledge. Corn sweeteners, your position. If it's corn syrup, my position is it's really, really bad for you. Non-nutritive sweeteners, I don't think they're nearly as bad for people as everybody thinks. Yes, they're a chemical. They're not whole unprocessed food. They're about as far as you can get from it. There's some evidence that some of them might even increase insulin resistance a little bit. You'll also hear some evidence, and some people totally believe it, that that sweet causes a neurologic release of insulin. The bottom line is just look at the numbers, look at the evidence. Non-nutritive sweeteners are not nearly as dangerous. And I know I make a lot of people cringe when I say that, but it's not nearly as dangerous as diabetes. And if it's a choice, you're better off not doing anything artificial, but you're better off not having to take a statin too. I mean, you're better off not having to take metformin, but we all get into positions where we need to make some changes, and we need help. We need help. Gator, we're almost done. Gator, can small particle LDL be purely hereditary, or is it more generally assumed? It's usually caused more by glycation-related issues, but there's a significant hereditary component to it. Gator, you can't really separate it out. Bunny Bubs, hi. Michael Sanders, hello, Michael. Is there concern about mercury as a preservative in the vaccine? I personally am not concerned about preservatives in the vaccine. We actually did, back in the day when I was doing a lot of detailed content on the vaccines, I covered that. And bottom line is, I mean, we went into deep detail on what was in them. Bottom line, I'm not, compared to the other risk, the risk of getting the disease, the live virus, I was not concerned about it. Bunny Bubs, calcification, breast, kidney stones, cataracts, osteoporosis, not sure. What is okay for kidney stones and calcifications? Is D3 and K2 safe? Yes, I think D3 and K2 are safe. Bananas, yeah, well, they'll give you a lot of potassium, but why don't you try getting your blood sugar before and after you eat a banana, and tell me how safe you think that banana was. Bob Bell, both ACE inhibitors and ARBs can cause mild anemia, as shown in multiple randomized clinical trials. Thank you, Bob. As usual, very, very astute, very well informed. Just Google anemia caused by ACE inhibitors. I'm not sure if there's an implication that therefore ACEs and ARBs shouldn't be taken. If you're saying that, I would argue otherwise, and I would go back to my last comment. Yeah, I'd rather people not have to use non-nutritive sweeteners. I'd rather people not have to use ACEs and ARBs or any other blood pressure medicine. I'd rather people not have to use statins, metformin, et cetera, et cetera. Each medication has its risk, its risks, and each vaccine has its risks. Rick Farnbach, I've worn a CGM. Thank you so much, Rick. Those are great. Not affected by artificial sweeteners. Really, really good point, Rick. And you're exactly right. I've got a lot of people on CGMs, Libre. Yeah, just Google me and Libre or me and Dexcom 6. Done a lot of head-to-head comparisons of those, and I'm a major fan of them. In fact, the FDA makes those prescription level things, and I disagree with that. I think non-diabetic. I think people should be able to access a Libre without a prescription. That's why I hold out a shingle and say, look, I'm licensed in all 50 states of the country. If you're somebody who would like to get a Libre, give me a call. Michelle and I can get you hooked up, because a Libre is, if you're 60 years old, you've been living for 60 years without a speedometer. You've been driving for 60 years without a speedometer. You've never known how fast you're going. And all of a sudden with a CGM, you're looking and you're seeing. And you find out very interesting things like Rick is talking about, which I know. Artificial sweeteners, I haven't talked to a single person that had a huge impact on their blood sugar by artificial sweeteners. Now, you would say, well, that's not the point, Doc. The point is it's not sugar, it's insulin. But I think Rick may be one step ahead of you on that comment, and that is, well, if your blood sugar doesn't go up, but you have a neurological increase in insulin, which I'm pretty skeptical of. I'm sure it happens, but I don't think it's practical to worry about it. You get same blood sugar, you get a release of insulin, that's going to drop your blood sugar. And I think that may be what Rick is referring to. And again, I'd go back and say the same thing. I have a lot of experience with these, with CGMs, and people saying, yeah, the artificial sweeteners are not impacting my blood sugar either way, making them go up or down due to neurological release of insulin. Bob Bell, I stopped ACE inhibitors and my red cell count increased significantly. Thank you for sharing, Bob. And, to my point earlier, I'm not saying these are right for everybody, and all of us have our own risk set. The vast majority of us don't have significant anemia associated with those two drug classes. And many of us get into a position where, in terms of risk benefit, it makes sense. Knock down 7, get up 8. OSDA. Hi, Dr. Brewer. Eggs actually good for heart disease patients. I don't think they're bad for them. And is L-carnitine good for heart disease patients to take also? Also, I missed what you said about a 4th COVID vaccine shot. I said it's not. You can go back. This gets automatically posted, and you can watch the whole thing. But the short version is the numbers aren't as compelling as the first 3 shots. But they're positive. And if you're not worried about, if you don't have a whole lot of negative emotion and fear of the vaccine, I personally am planning on getting one, probably over the next couple of weeks. If you do get it, it should be 4 to 5 months after your 3rd jab, and see if they aspirate first before they inject. Anyway, L-carnitine, I've done videos on that. I think there is some evidence that it helps, but it's, like many supplements, it's just not mind-blowing evidence. Eggs for heart. I'll also say this. A lot of people have been worried about eggs for heart. And that comes to a technical biochemical issue. There's this a couple of chemicals come out of that. I did a study on those. The reality was, if you have healthy kidneys, if you have a healthy body, eggs are not bad for your heart. And in fact, if an egg keeps you from eating a cinnamon roll for breakfast, then it's going to be very good. It's not inherently going to fix problems with your heart, but it's not going to do the damage that a lot of other things that it would replace could do. Ken Patu, my triglyceride over HDL was greater than 10 on a whole foods, plant-based Caldwell-Esselstyn type diet. Dropped to 0.8 on keto. Ken, what a statistic. Thank you so much for sharing. And folks, that's it for me for today. Thank you so much.